You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and that cadence call is the call that we all know, and it means it's time for David's Pick, and we have a wonderful guest on today, and we're looking forward to talking to her about, and we both have a very unique interest. We have Pat Wilbanks DeWitt on, and we'll get into what we're going to be talking about, but we do have one thing in common, and that's our interest in young folks and our interest in them being a part of the military at some point. And we'll be talking about a very interesting foundation that supports our youth. But before we get started, we've sort of changed everything around here with David's Pick, and because of a friend of mine that's gone through surgery, and we got a moment he was a victim of Agent Orange, and he's doing quite well, as a matter of fact. But when he was going through surgery, we decided to take out just a moment for everybody, a moment of silence for everybody to think about our veterans. Obviously, that's the past, our present that are serving today, and our future military that is the backbone of our country. And we have so many wonderful veterans. We're losing, unfortunately, many veterans daily that were part of World War II, the greatest generation. And now we're losing a lot of our Vietnam veterans that are getting up in age like I am. So we're going to take just a minute, and if you don't mind, just think about our veterans and our military, and we'll be right back with Pat DeWitt right after. Okay, thank you. And Pat, you're on the line with us on America's Web Radio, correct?
Good morning, David.
Good morning. How are you doing down there in Cornelia?
Actually, I live in Monroe.
Oh, in Monroe. Okay, I'm sorry. You told me that, and I didn't write it down. But you grew up in Cornelia, right?
I did. I certainly did. And that's a little town in northeast Georgia.
And it has the distinction of having one of the few Medal of Honor recipients. And I wasn't about to say the other word for fear that you'd come up and hit me on the head, but we're slowly learning that a Medal of Honor recipient is not the same as, because there are no winners. And
that is correct.
You know what an individual goes through to become a recipient is just absolutely incredible. And we're going to be talking about your brother, and then we're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to me, is your foundation in his name. Your brother was Hilliard Wilbanks, and
correct.
He was a pilot in Vietnam, and was, from what you said, he had almost lived for the moment. Tell me something about, as you all were growing up, what was some of his favorite things? And he was your older brother. But
that's correct. I have 3 older brothers. Actually, about 11 years later, I came along. So I practically grew up by myself.
That sounds like my little sister. I'm 13 years older than she is.
Oh, well, I understand that. We actually grew up in Cornelia in a very conservative family. And of course, Mom and Dad had 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter, me. Um, our dad had a tractor and farm equipment business, and Mother worked as a seamstress in a factory. So Hilliard was the oldest son. He was smart, a great student, and always did his best in everything he was involved with. He loved football, and he played football in high school, and he even played the piano for a little country church that we attended, and he delivered newspapers riding his bicycle on Sunday mornings.
There again, we have something in common. That's I had a bicycle with my bag on it.
Yes, exactly.
And unfortunately, on my route was the editor of the paper, and so I had to put his on the porch.
Absolutely. But he graduated from Cornelia High School in 1950 at the age of 16. Back in those days, there were only 11 grades in Habersham County. And, of course, during that summer, he turned 17 and promptly joined the Air Force. Cornelia is a very small town back in those days, and I think that he didn't see a lot of potential there. So I was 2 years old when he left home. Our family history has some interesting things. Our great-great-grandfather had fought for the Confederacy, and other ancestors, of course, fought down for freedom down the line. And our dad was too young to serve in World War I, but he was too old to serve in World War II. But many of our uncles paid the sacrifice of leaving home to serve. And I think this had a lot to do with Hilliard's interest in the military. All 3 of my brothers served in the military, as well as my husband. So he was an all-around good person, very committed to his country, and he had great faith in his fellow man and always looked for and expected the best from people. I have been told that he and some of his buddies would hang out to watch the World War II paratroopers march through Cornelia as they were on their way to Atlanta from training at Camp Toccoa. Mama and Daddy couldn't afford to send us to college, so I'm sure he thought that joining the Air Force would be a good way to advance himself and further his education.
That's fantastic. So how old was he when he joined?
He had just turned 17 in July, and he joined the 1st of August.
Wow.
So that was a tender age.
And where did he go first? I am a veteran, but I was Army, and the only thing I know about the Air Force is that I have a son that's a major in the Air Force. So that's about as much as I know about it. And he won't tell me what he does, or he says, the old line, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. And neither one of us are too anxious about that.
Right, exactly. Well, Hilliard started out after basic training in his enlisted years. He went in as enlisted, and he served as a military policeman. Most of those 4 years was spent in Tucson, Arizona. He had some overseas TDY duty, but toward the end of that 4-year enlistment commitment, he was selected to test for OCS, Officer Candidate School, an aviation cadet. He was accepted and became a distinguished graduate in his pilot training class of 55P. Of course, that's 1955, and the alphabetical listing of the training classes, he was down to the letter P, as in Pat. The final 6 months of his training was learning to fly jets, and so from soloing in a tiny Cessna all the way up through jet pilot training, that had all just taken 15 months. And his rank changed to second lieutenant, and he graduated with honors. He had really found what he loved, and those pilot wings were his dream come true. So he was off and running.
That's a terrific story, and you know, I we get a lot of stories, and how it is a dream come true. And I'm going to take just a moment just to mention the fact that if we have parents or grandparents that are listening, veterans, and you have grandkids, or if they're young people that have just graduated from high school or college, the military can do so much and be so much for you. My son graduated from a little school called Texas A&M, and was in uniform the whole time. Obviously, was in the Corps, and then he went on into the Air Force, and he went through Air Force ROTC at A&M, and he loves it. And he's just moved. He and his wife have just moved back from Germany and into Shaw Air Force Base. So, if you get a taste of the military, it is absolutely fantastic. So your brother found what he loved to do, and what's the old saying? If you love what you're doing, you never have to have a job, or you never have a job.
Right. And I really think he felt that way about it, because he absolutely loved flying and he loved the Air Force. So I think you could say that. Actually, he has a granddaughter who married a corpsman who had graduated from Texas A&M, and he is now serving in the Marine Corps. He is out in California right now. So that's the first of the military grandchildren to come along. So to join one of our services. So we're real proud of him.
So after, and his wife's name, I believe, was Pam. Is that correct?
His wife's name is Rosemary.
Rosemary. I'm sorry. I don't know where I'm sorry. Anyway, so you all got the knock on the door at approximately the same time that he had gone down in Vietnam, correct?
It was the next day, I think, the next morning. I don't know how much time had actually passed, but a knock came at our front door, or my mother and daddy's front door. I was already married and living away from home, but as close to that same time, a knock came at Rosemary's door. She was living in Mississippi with her parents to tell us that he had died in battle. He had been in Vietnam 11 months and was scheduled to return home in just a few weeks. And this was his 488th mission. But before he left to go to Vietnam, Rosemary is an only child. So it seemed right for her to stay with her mom and dad in Mississippi while he was going to be gone for that year. They made the decision for her to stay there. Of course, by this time, they had two small children. I think there were 3 and 5. And she had just found out just a few weeks before he was to leave the state that they were expecting twins. And, of course, he left, and after much consideration, they talked about, whether he should ask for a delay in leaving or to go ahead as scheduled. But they did decide to go ahead as scheduled so that he could get back as soon as possible. And, of course, the twins were born 2 weeks after he left the state. They were born early. So he never got to see them except in pictures.
Wow. This is something else that we do, and that's, and it really came to pass in when the Desert Shield and Desert Storm and many of our reservists were called up. But on active duty and when you're deployed, the family is in the military just as much as the person, be it man or woman, that's serving, And
Yes.
A lot of times we forget, and we only look at, quote, end quote, the soldier or the person in uniform, when all of the family members, whether it's brothers, sisters, mother, dad, whatever it is, children, they're all in support of that person that's wearing the uniform. And
That is correct.
I look back on. I wasn't born when my father was in the service, but I look back on letters that he and my mother shared, and just I love history and looking back on when you were gone for 6 months, you were gone for 6 months, and you were lucky to have gotten one or two, maybe three letters within that period of time. And today with our electronics, we're blessed. And even in Vietnam, you didn't have the electronics that we have today, and it's it's got to ease some of the separation pain between the members of the family and the one that's serving, wherever they are.
Right. That's correct.
And we support the families of our military and always pray for them and wish them the best as they're suffering through separation, and it's tough. It's very tough.
Hmm.
So anyway, back to your brother and the information that you'd received, and then I want to sort of turn it back into what you all did after that.
Hmm. Well, part of his job, his job while he was in Vietnam, I would like to talk just a little bit about that.
Sure.
Um, Vietnam was divided into 4 military regions, excuse me, and he was assigned to 2 corps, and that is in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Most of his time was working out of Bao Loc and Dalat, and of course today you hear about Dalat being the garden area of Vietnam, that it is so beautiful and that sort of thing. And of course in his letters that he wrote home, he talked about how pretty the country was. But his job over there was a forward air controller, flying the O-1 Bird Dog. And the Bird Dog is a tiny, unarmed Cessna-type aircraft, not the sleek jets that he was used to flying. And the O-1s were used by the Air Force. Of course, the Army, I believe, used the L-19, but they were very similar, and all were referred to as Bird Dogs. It could reach 150 miles per hour in an emergency, but the normal cruising speed was only 104 miles per hour. It had 2 seats, but forward air controllers usually flew alone. Sometimes they would have an observer in their back seat, but they carried no ordnance. The only thing that they carried was 4 white phosphorus smoke rockets that were attached underneath the wings, and those rockets were used to mark targets. So when the forward air controller marked a target, the command to the incoming fighters was, hit my smoke. Of course, the job every day was to fly low and slow in these small spotter airplanes, conducting visual reconnaissance in the same areas every day. They would become familiar with the terrain and regular activity in their sector, noticing that if any big changes had taken place, and they knew all the places that the enemy could hide. Each forward air controller got to know his area like the back of his hand. And, of course, the job was to support our troops and the friendlies on the ground. And the Bird Dog provided a good way to really see what was happening on the ground. So his job was to alert the ground forces when an enemy was spotted, to mark the target with his smoke rockets, and to call in the firepower. Forward air controllers actually directed all firepower for battles in Vietnam. And after the attack, he would be called back in to assess the damage after the battle was over. These little planes were so vulnerable. Small arms fire from the ground could easily penetrate the cockpit, and his only weapon was his pistol and an M16 that he carried for self-defense in case his plane was shot down and he had to defend himself on the ground. The job was certainly not without great risk, and they carried huge bounties on their heads. If the enemy could shoot down a forward air controller, that was a huge, huge deal. And I certainly did not understand how dangerous that job was.
You know, quite frankly, any job in Vietnam was dangerous, and
Absolutely.
some were more dangerous than others. And you know, in the Army, we call them forward observers, FOs, and your brother was doing exactly the same thing that many others did on the ground, and it's a dangerous position to be in. I want to remind you that we'll be taking a break in about 6 minutes, and then we'll have about 30 minutes to wind up. So after he was shot down, was it, or do you all know for a fact that it was KIA or?
Yes, we knew well, we knew quickly that he had been killed, yes. It was a week or so before his body arrived back in the United States, and his funeral service was in Mississippi, and he was buried in the town of Fayette. Rosemary's grandparents lived in Fayette, and they had been married in that little town at her grandmother's home back in 1956. And so they made the decision before he left the States that that's where he wanted to be buried. So it was later that same year, after we were notified, that he would be presented posthumously with the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions on the battlefield. The whole family was flown to Washington, and the ceremony took place at the Pentagon. Several of the eyewitnesses to the battle and what had happened that day were present for the ceremony, along with his commanding officer, Colonel Norman Mueller. The Medal of Honor was presented to Rosemary on January 24th, 1968. That was just 11 months after he had died.
Wow.
And it was presented by the Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. Harold Brown, and Chief of Staff, General McConnell. They also presented her with the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 19 oak leaf clusters, and of course that is made up from the number of missions that he had flown, the Air Force Commendation Medal, and the Purple Heart. So,
that must have been quite an experience for you and your parents.
It was. And I have to say that over these last 50-plus years, our family has been blessed to be able to talk with and meet some face-to-face some of the eyewitnesses to the battle and the heroism that they saw that day. And they have shared how fierce the battle was and how desperate the situation for all of them really was. One of the American advisors on the ground told us that when he had called in on the radio to alert them of the enemy being dug in and ready to ambush, he had told them that it would be 4 or 5 minutes before firepower from the jets would reach them. And the response from the American advisors was, well, that will be 4 or 5 minutes too late. They were desperate and facing terrible odds. So he had understood this position and without regard to his own personal safety, did all he could to distract the enemy, hoping to give the Rangers and their American advisors time to retreat by drawing enemy fire up to himself and the bird dog. He made repeated passes over the enemy and even resorted to firing his M16 out the window of the plane. And that is courage, that is sacrifice, and that is patriotism. So the fact that we have had contact with some of these eyewitnesses, some of the folks that he saved, has been a very important part of losing him and going through the grief process. And it has definitely given us some peace about it. An important part is that most of those contacts that we have had with them have taken place just in the last few years. So that is many years without knowing much of anything about the actual battle and hearing from people firsthand. To us, that was a great gift. And in conversations, either in person or on the phone, some of these men have told us that they have not even spoken of Vietnam or the actions that took place on the battle that day until our phone call to them. So hopefully it was healing for them as well as for us.
Speaking of healing, we in Johns Creek, Georgia, we have the Healing Wall. Are you familiar with that, Pat?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and it's quite a story of what a little town can do, like Johns Creek, and when they have leadership like Mike Moselle that brought the Healing Wall, which is a replica of the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C., and it now has a permanent home in Newtown Park in Johns Creek, Georgia. And it's going to have a kiosk very shortly that you'll be able to type in a name and find out exactly where that name is. With that being said, we're going to take a quick break on America's Web Radio, and then we're going to come back and talk about the future a little bit. And we'll be back with Pat right after this.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S.
What do you think,
Army
Pat?
with training in fields like medical
Well,
care, linguistics,
what do you
and
think?
engineering.
That's the
And
question.
Well,
career can
we're going
amplify your
along.
efforts with
You enjoying
humanitarian
it?
opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits.
What would
so
you
you'll
like
be
to go
taken
to
care of,
next?
too.
I'd like
Learn
to
more
start
at
talking about the
GoArmy.com.
foundation and getting young folks in.
Okay,
So
very good.
we will do that right after this.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we do thank you for listening to David's Pick, which we have turned David's Pick into basically talking about veterans and the potential of recruiting and so forth and so on. And so after your brother died in Vietnam, shot down, was he in a 172 or?
It was more like a 150 type
150?
thing, I think.
Okay, so he was in a high-wing Cessna, huh?
Absolutely, right.
Okay. I did some training in that, but I preferred the low wings. But anyway, so after he died, you all, how many years before you all started the foundation?
Oh, many.
Many. Okay.
Many. Actually, we sort of have to fast forward his story to 2000, the year 2000. Actually, 30 years had passed since the Medal of Honor had been presented. And it sort of goes in sort of a chronological order, if you'll bear with me.
Sure.
First of all, for many years, we had no real contact with Rosemary and the children in Mississippi. Our dad had died early on, shortly after he had died, and then some issues came about that caused a separation within our family. And our mom died in 1995 without really knowing these 4 grandchildren that lived in Mississippi. But, God's timing is always right. His ways are much better than our ways. So what happened was some tributes to his memory began happening. Up to this point, nothing had been done to honor him. So God used these events that I'm going to tell you briefly about that lead up to the founding of the foundation. These events led to putting our family back together. So I have to say, thanks be to God. And the first thing that happened was in the year 2000. That forward air controllers, actually, who served in the war in Southeast Asia, got together and decided to have a reunion in the year 2000. And they created a beautiful memorial in the air park at Hulbert Field in Florida. That's Fort Walton Beach area. Hurlburt is where they all trained before going to Vietnam. So this memorial was to honor the 233 Ford air controllers who died during the Vietnam War. There was a huge turnout for this reunion, and over 700 Ford air controllers gathered for this special day. Special honor was given to the two Ford air controllers who had received the Medal of Honor, Captain Hilliard Wilbanks from Georgia and Captain Stephen Bennett from Texas. So this brings me back to the family story. Hilliard's Mississippi family and his Georgia family met once again at this historic reunion to honor Hilliard. And to God be the glory for all that happening. Um, then the following year, in 2001, several things happened to honor Hilliard. He was inducted into the Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame in Warner Robins. There are two Air Force Medal of Honor recipients from the state of Georgia, Hilliard and Colonel Joe Jackson of Noonan, and both have been inducted into the Aviation Hall of Fame and have a special monument on the grounds of the museum about their heroic things in Vietnam. That same year, our hometown community sponsored a beautiful granite memorial for Hilliard in Cornelia. This ceremony was complete with Robins Air Force Base providing the color guard and the 21-gun salute, and Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, providing a missing man formation flyover.
That's where my son is now.
Actually, my husband and I were stationed there the 4 years he was in the Air Force.
Ah,
So
okay.
there's another commonality. Also, the the International Bird Dog Association provided a flyover for that ceremony. So that was really special. Another tribute that same year was a building dedication ceremony at Fort Benning for the new home of the 1707th Air Support Operations Squadron. They chose to name the building after Hilliard because the 1707th provides air support for all Army operations on the battlefield in today's world, or at least they did back in 2001. I'll make that clear. And those operations are similar to what he did as a forward air controller in Vietnam. And then later, a couple of years later, in 2003, his class of 55P, the pilot training class, dedicated a beautiful bench at the Air Force Museum's Memorial Gardens at Wright Pat in Dayton, Ohio. So several wonderful things led up to the founding of the foundation.
We've got about 25 minutes left, so I want to keep that in the back of our mind as we're talking about this. So if you can sort of speed it up just a little bit.
All right. And the foundation was established as a result of the Habersham County Board of Education's decision to name the new middle school in the county after my brother. We had a local champion, Mr. Ted Smith, who put together a committee. This was an unprecedented decision for the board to agree to name the school for an individual. It had never been done before. And, of course, this was for 6th, 7th, 8th graders of the Hilliard A. Wilbanks Middle School.
Wow.
He put together a dedication committee and began fundraising and for the dedication day. And to make a long story short, this committee actually turned into the board of directors for the beginning of the Hilliard A. Wilbanks Foundation. We took care of all the legal stuff, and that's how it began, with a mission statement being threefold: to honor and remember Captain Wilbanks by perpetuating his legacy of courage, sacrifice, and patriotism. The second point was to raise funds for JROTC scholarship, and the third point was to raise awareness of the Medal of Honor and its meaning. So we've done several things at the middle school. We continue to support them in various activities. And, of course, the greatest achievement I think that the foundation has achieved is to set up a permanent endowment at the University of North Georgia. This creation of the Captain Henry Ray Wilbanks Medal of Honor Memorial Scholarship will keep his memory alive forever. So we have been able to give 8 $4,000 scholarships to JROTC cadets from the Northeast Georgia area in the early years of the foundation. And then, of course, it was always my dream of building an endowment to have a lasting scholarship in memory of him, and of course that happened. You might want to ask why we chose the University of North Georgia. It is one of the 6 senior military colleges in our nation, and their Corps of Cadets is an outstanding program that produces future leaders in our military. It's actually known as the Military College of Georgia, and our board of directors chose UNG because the majority of the earlier scholarships that we had given, those recipients had chose to attend UNG. It is one of the more affordable military colleges. So this setting up this Medal of Honor Memorial Scholarship will certainly help young cadets as they pursue that undergraduate degree, and of course hopefully commission into our military to actively serve our country.
How do you feel like today that our kids have the same feeling that your brother had about joining?
No, not really. I do not. I think the JROTC programs that our country has, whether they're Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force programs, I think they do a fantastic job in teaching our kids leadership and the importance of patriotism. And I just wish more young people would see that as a very important part.
Well, if I can add in on this, we look at the parents, and the parents are the ones that decide ultimately the history books in our schools. They decide a lot, and they can't let their kids down by not teaching them. And every kid should be aware of World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, and then Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And one of the things that I feel like, and I can't put any numbers to this at all, but that there was a reason for the pandemic, and we've heard from a lot of parents that didn't realize the lack of information in many of our history books, and they've taken their kids and gone back and explained Vietnam, explained Korea, and then Vietnam, and so forth and so on. And this is something that we actively pursue, is that we get better history books. And this is one thing that I love about the Junior ROTC, is that they go back, and I've met a couple of them that are the I say commanding officers. They're the ones that are in charge of the programs in Noonan and elsewhere, that they unfortunately have to take the task of becoming the history teacher. And if kids understood the sacrifices that the greatest generation, and I certainly include Vietnam veterans in that generation, they were raised by the greatest generation, and appreciate what they have gone through. And I appreciate the job that all of the junior ROTC facilities are doing across the country. And I think the work, how can people contact you, and how can folks give to your foundation?
Okay. We would love for people to visit our website, which is www.hilliardawilbanksfoundation.org, and we are online. We have a good website, and one of our directors has even created a website for our Medal of Honor recipients from Georgia. So we're proud of that, and we would just love to be able to hear from anybody. Our address, of course, is on there. It's Cornelia, Georgia. I'm not sure of the post office box right off the top of my head. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Pat, let me ask you, you've got in my opinion, a heck of a story to tell, and what you all have done with a loss has made it into a positive with the foundation.
Right.
Are you willing to give talks about the foundation at different meetings?
Oh, absolutely. I have prepared a PowerPoint that we use sometimes for meetings, and I would love to share that with any and everybody.
Good. This is one of the things that we talk about too on our classic car show. And well, what are you doing talking about classic cars in this show? Well, we as a country sometimes overlook the value and the wealth of our parents, and particularly our grandparents, and if you're fortunate enough to have great-grandparents, to sit down and talk to them. And, we're losing hundreds of thousands daily that were involved in World War II, and the number of Vietnam veterans that we're losing is rapidly catching up with the World War II veterans. And, I personally like idioms. I love stories and tales, and we always or generally will ask our guest if they know one veteran that can tell one story, and nobody knows that veteran. There's not one made, and they may or may not talk about their experience in war, but they'll talk about their best buddy. They'll talk about some of the shenanigans they pulled in basic or AIT or whatever the case might be, but they all have stories. And our kids need to know, and this sounds crazy, but our kids need to know their grandparents. And the grandparents need to know their grandchildren and relate to them about their experiences. And the other thing that we've had here at the station is that we've never interviewed, and I can pretty well say that, well, I can. We've never interviewed a veteran that, if called upon, wouldn't put the uniform back on. And once you've taken that oath, and many of them, if not all, again, live by John's 15:13. Greater love hath no man to lay down his life for his friends. And, we've talked to many, many veterans that they all feel the same, and woe be unto anyone that tries to attack the United States.
Right. Well, one thing that we have done in the foundation is to try to raise awareness of the Medal of Honor. We have just been shocked that so many people have no clue about the Medal of Honor. And, of course, that brings me up to the induction into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And I know that's one of your special things that you like to plug and give praise to Colonel Rick White and Paul Longyear for the work that they began and continue to do with the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Hilliard, along with 17 other Georgians, were in the inaugural year inducted into the Hall of Fame, and with the ceremony in Columbus. And I'd like to say that Wilbanks Middle School actually submitted Peter's name for nomination. Their principal is a military brat. She grew up with a wonderful patriotic spirit, and she is dedicated to teaching those kids in the middle school and leading them with patriotism in the forefront of the school. So actually the school mascot was chosen by the students, and they're known as the Patriots. So we have hope for tomorrow.
Oh yeah, that's super. That's
Yeah.
super.
The one of as part of the raising awareness of the Medal of Honor, we are trying to make sure the foundation is trying to make sure that our Georgia's 27 Medal of Honor recipients will all be inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And of course, the categories for induction are valor, service, and achievement. And the 27 Medal of Honor recipients certainly fit into the valor category. So in keeping with that part of our mission, we will continue to nominate Medal of Honor recipients for induction into the Hall of Fame. To date, I believe there's only been 14 of the 27 to be inducted so far. So I just would say to your listeners, anybody can submit a nomination. Just go to the website for the forms needed for the nomination process. It's not complicated and only requires a small processing fee. So let's all work together to see that Medal of Honor recipients are nominated, as well as those other veterans who have given so much for their country.
No question. And, like you said, we do support the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and Rick White is always of service and helps us with putting together our guest list for our shows. And
Right.
he talked to you, and here you are. And
Right.
it's just we talk about this too, and the fact that the military is the biggest fraternity and sorority in the world, and the feeling that you have when you're around a brother veteran and or sister, you can talk to them because they know and it all starts with best friendships in basic and AIT, or whatever the Air Force calls it, and boot camp for the Marines and for the Navy. And it really, there's just a feeling of, I guess the best word or words are God and country, and that wraps it up, And
Yeah.
there's I obviously never met your brother or anything, but with all the honors and with everything that he's been awarded, I would bet you dollars to donuts he'd just sort of scuff his feet and say, "Oh shucks, twerk nothing," And
he would actually be quite humbled and wouldn't want any of this probably. But in honoring him, we're raising the awareness of the Medal of Honor.
Well, with what you're doing, you're saluting all others, and not just Medal of Honor winners, Medal of Honor recipients. It's everybody that has served, and
Right.
you don't know where fate is going to lead you, or what situation fate's going to put you in. But anybody that raised their hand had the same opportunity, and the government picks and chooses, so they could have picked you or anybody else. And really, like I said, with what you all are doing, it's glorifying everybody that served, and not everybody can be a Medal of Honor recipient. And
That's correct.
and there's stories that have still not been told, and but the ones that are recipients do need to be honored, and for shame, for anybody, any age, that doesn't know and doesn't respect what it means to be a Medal of Honor recipient.
Right. We have 3 living Medal of Honor recipients in the state of Georgia right now. And the foundation has tried to honor them in special ways. I don't know if I have time to tell you about the honoring them at a University of Georgia ball game. Do I have time?
Very quickly.
Okay. We have 3 living recipients from Georgia, and part of our goal was to honor them as well as other folks. And so the first year, we worked in conjunction with the University of Georgia's athletic department to recognize our living Medal of Honor recipients during their annual tribute to veterans during one of the varsity football games in the fall. We planted the idea, and they asked us to participate in that. So the first year, we brought Colonel Joe Jackson and his wife, Rosie, back to Georgia once again from Kent, Washington, to be recognized on the field at the football game as part of UGA's Veterans Day tribute. The second year, we sponsored General James Livingston, also a Georgia Medal of Honor recipient. He now lives in South Carolina, to be recognized on the field as well. And the foundation was honored to be allowed to escort them on the field during the game. So that was a really, really special day. During the game, pictures of all Georgia's 27 Medal of Honor recipients were shown on that huge jumbotron. So we provided the material that was used, and as I said, extra special days. I have to say that we lost Colonel Jackson last year. We were real sad about that, but we have 3 living recipients still in the state, and they are Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Ray from Cordele, Lieutenant Colonel James Sprayberry from LaGrange, and Major General James Livingston from Towns, Georgia. So our country only has 69 living Medal of Honor recipients at the present time. So we need to do all that we can to honor them, as well as all of our veterans everywhere.
You know, and this is, again, something that we do that for folks that don't know it, and we push, I don't know if you remember or not, but there was a time that there was the Red Shirt Fridays, and we're pushing that again, that you wear a red shirt on Friday out of respect for our military, past, present, and future, our first responders, of which many of them are veterans. And just you know, if you see somebody in uniform, or like many of us can pick out a veteran in an airport, and if we have the opportunity, we buy them a meal, and that's for first responders or anyone that's serving the country. And believe it or not, most of the veterans that I know and first responders, and I've been very fortunate to be all 3, but they all do it out of love for what they're doing, and not out of trying to be anything other than the fact that they want to serve. And there's something inbred in these people, and just like with your brother Pat, you know, there's something in their blood that says, this is for not only, and you know, and they're rewarded in their own ways by the satisfaction of what they do.
Well, we need, you know, these guys are our real American heroes of today, and should be remembered as such. Our freedom is not free. I remember Tommy Clack saying that over and over and over, and we even have a bumper sticker. Our freedom is not free. We live in the greatest country in the world, and it's because young women have been willing to fight for her. So I say God bless our military, God bless the USA, and God bless all of our veterans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One other question that I like to ask before our guests run off is, this has been very inspiring, and we want to support the foundation and keep talking about it, and not only what you all do on a local basis, but also supporting the Medal of Honor and letting people know. Pat, will you come back?
Oh, certainly. This has been a great day. I truly thank you for inviting us to be on.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I want to thank, like you've done in the past, Colonel Rick White, retired, but Colonel White has become a very close friend, and we were together at the JC Healing Wall this past Saturday, and quite a few people showed up for the stories of the POWs that were captured in Vietnam, and we had the longest enlisted POW and several others, and it's always inspiring. And it's easy in our day and age to, well, I got this problem, I got that problem, but what these guys have gone through, what our veterans in many cases have gone through, is just absolutely beyond. And
actually, if I can insert that, since you're talking about POWs, from Habersham County, we had a POW, Colonel Ben Purcell, who died just a few years ago, but he survived, I think it was like 5 years being a POW, and it was fantastic having been able to know him after all that. And he has a suitcase that he carried around with the objects that he created while he was a prisoner of war. So I really appreciate this ceremony that was held in Johns Creek. That was wonderful.
Well, had I known you were going to be there, I wish we'd have gotten to bump elbows or whatever.
Well, I actually was not present.
Oh, okay.
But, I knew about it and had read about it and hope to visit there soon.
Well, like I mentioned, and you can almost bet that if you go, not only is it inspiring to see it, but you'll potentially hear some stories. And do you know Roger Wise by chance?
No, I do not.
Okay, Roger, he's one of these that if he's got one, he's got 1,000 stories. But one of his stories is meeting a mother and her son at the wall, and the son standing up and saying, "I met my father for the first time today," just as your family and kids going to the healing wall would meet your brother.
Right.
So,
we are very much hoping that his children and some of the grandchildren will be more involved with the foundation as time goes on. Of course, a lot of our board members are getting older,
Yes,
and we would really like to make sure that the foundation has a future. And there has been some interest from the grandchildren, and we are just very, very excited about that.
Pat, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We're out of time, and
Okay.
we want to thank you for coming on today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And we want to thank Pat DeWitt for coming on, talking about her foundation and her brother's service. And we look forward to you all joining us next week on America's Web Radio.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Pat, thank you.
If you live to serve and want to make
Thank you, David. We
consider
appreciate
joining
it.
the U.S. Army.
Well, let's keep in touch, and if you need something, said about the foundation, or if you wouldn't mind, I can't do it right now, but I'll call you or email you about. I'd like to do a promo for the foundation.